And he said, just can't you find some way to keep me? And I said, no. And furthermore, I can't in good conscience have you turn that down. You got a family. You can't, you've got to go and take that money because we can't give it to you. His loss hurt us. We could not replace him. And it hurt us on the field the following year. And, but that's what the salary cap's designed to do.
Welcome to Negotiation Warriors. I am Cliff Stein, and I am on a never-ending quest to learn what it takes to be a great negotiator. In every episode, I will sit down with some of the greatest negotiators in professional sports who will share insights, knowledge, and draw upon their real-life negotiation experiences. Negotiation Warriors is sponsored by Front Office 360, premium cap management software. To find out how we are helping college athletic programs, go to frontoffice360.com to schedule a demo. Welcome back to Negotiation Warriors, the podcast that features conversations with the greatest negotiators in professional sports. I am your host, Cliff Stein, and this is part 2 of the interview with Hall of Fame General Manager Bill Polian. Let me ask you this question and see if you think that there is an opportunity for evaluation to play a stronger role in college. When I study NFL rosters today, after you get past the starters, 22 or 23 players, the majority of the rest of the roster is minimum salary or over $1 million, close to the minimum, because we know that supply is greater than demand. And I think that's why you're able to pay your backups that way. In college, it's a little bit different. But let me throw this stat at you. 25% of all NFL players on today's roster, meaning 53-man, injured reserve, and practice squad, were either zero-star recruits out of high school or came direct to the NFL from an FCS school, Group of 5, Division II, Division III, or JUCO. That's approximately 650 players. You see that as a potential opportunity for colleges to change the way they're going about the evaluation, similar to how you found the players that you found?
Yes, but there's a caveat attached to that. You asked in an earlier question, maybe I didn't answer it completely enough, excuse me. How did the coaches adapt to that? Well, every year I would reorient our position coaches about the cap. Here's the little niggling changes that have been made. This is not going to affect our strategy, or it is going to affect our strategy. And they bought in. And in those days, we had much smaller staffs. It was, essentially 12, 13 guys. Now it's 21 or all the way up to 25. But they all bought in. The college paradigm remains, I would say 99%, but that's an exaggeration, 90%. The recruiting paradigm. I can go out there and sell this guy to come to our school because I'm personable. I have a relationship with his high school coach. I have a relationship with his family, etc. That's not proven to be true. Otherwise, the transfer portal would be empty, right? Or wouldn't have the number of players in it that are in it. A. And B, there's no need to recruit anymore. It's all negotiation. Each of these players, certainly the top ones, not the ones you're speaking about in your question, but the top ones all have agents. And so you've got a general manager who probably knows what he's doing in terms of dealing with agents. But now you get position coaches who are recruiting. What are you recruiting for? Just evaluate. Tell us who the best players are, and then we'll go and negotiate with them, just like the pros do. They haven't gotten there. They still think that that the recruiting paradigm is what counts. When in fact, you heard Lane Kiffin say, the people with the most money are the ones who are going to do best, i.e., the transfer portal or high school recruiting. There are some college programs, to your point, and Mississippi was one of them for good reason. Lane did a great job there. That rely totally or almost totally on transfers. They build teams out of the transfer portal rather than just filling a need here or a need there. They're building 3/4 of their team out of the transfer portal. Now, how do you do that efficiently? You do it two ways. One, people who are in the portal that are sort of name players, and two, that 25% who are unearthed by scouting, who come up from the lower levels, who are missed the first time around. For example, there's no question about this. It's a simple fact. If you're not height, weight, speed qualified by the time you're a sophomore in high school, the Power 5 or Power 4 schools are going to pass you by. You're not going to be a recruit. So you're going to end up going to a school in a, quote, less conference. And the good ones who thrive there, that's AAA baseball for the big guys. Go down there and get that guy and have him transfer up. That's where that 25% comes from. And if you do a better job, that's where recruiting comes in. If you do a better job with that group, you will have better backups and even better starters. Indiana's a prime example. Coach Signetti brought with him, I think, pretty close to a dozen people from James Madison. And, they won a historic national championship with them. So you have to do it from all standpoints. But the fact that there is no cap and no floor, obviously, creates an imbalance that's really, really hard to overcome. And the way to overcome it is through better evaluation. But that means that you have to increase the evaluation staff and put less emphasis on the recruiting part of it. And it's hard for assistant coaches who've spent their whole careers, or even head coaches who spent their whole careers at the college level, to let that recruiting part go.
Has any of them reached out to you to see if transitioning to the front office model will work for college? Has anybody tried to pick your brain on that?
Yeah, I've talked to a few people about it, and in one case, even drew up a blueprint for them, which they implemented and did quite well with. You still have to have. I'm not advocating that assistant coaches don't go on the road anymore or go to high schools and see kids and evaluate them and all that kind of thing. That's fine, but ultimately, and certainly at the Power 4 level, it's what you can pay that seals the deal. And so that you have to do two things. You have to decide who you want to pay and what you want to pay them, and then how do you fill in the rest of your squad? Those are the two questions that have to be answered before anything else happens. Yeah. So if you're a school, I apologize, I'm going on too long here, but if you're a school, for example, that comes from a fertile football area, let's use LSU as an example, and you have these 5 or 6 state schools that play lower level division football, that's your farm system. You have someone has to be on top of that 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and you have to get the best players out of that system via the transfer portal. And as it turns out, most high school players in Louisiana aspire to play under the lights in Tiger Stadium. So when you come knocking on the door asking a transfer to come, you got a leg up. So you can do a little recruiting. The facilities help. But the bottom line is, the first thing is evaluation. You have to evaluate who can play for you at that SEC level.
I love that you talked about that, just because I think this is where we're in a really state of uncertainty, unknown, fear. You got people in positions that they're not used to being in. You got general managers who hadn't been asked to negotiate before. You got evaluators that maybe don't have the same experience as someone's worked in the pro leagues, or the staffing, like you said, the number of people. So I love that you're talking about it. I'm going to shift over back to your book for a second, because in my class, I talk a lot about, you talk about philosophy on evaluation. And then I also talk about philosophy on contract extensions. On page 45 of your book, I'm just going to read something real quick, where you said, and you talked about Joe Banner and how they did things at the Eagles. And your belief was you let players go to the very end of their agreements so that you had a very good benchmark of what they were and what they would become. And that caused you to sign them at higher prices. The closer you get to free agency, the higher the price. Obviously, that gives you less room. Is that kind of what your philosophy was versus how Joe Banner seemed to be like trying to sign them early and identify them earlier and then pay less? But you seem to have a different philosophy. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, and I later on, Joe and I were on a forum together, and I didn't realize that we had different financial situations and financial paradigms. We had, by order of Mercy, because we were a smaller market franchise, just stadium size, for example, we were just barely above 60,000 in the old Hoosier Dome, 66 in the new stadium. The Eagles were in the 72, 73. So that's a lot of money when you're selling out every game, and Philadelphia prices for tickets are going to be higher than Indianapolis. So there's a revenue issue there. And we had to be cash to cap. We could only spend as much cash in any given year as what the cap called for. Joe, on the other hand, and we didn't, neither of us knew this until we were on the forum together, didn't have to be cash to cap. He could invest more cash in any given year in the system and in his team, as long as they stayed under the cap, and that's done by length of contract and things like that. Now, as it turned out, it really was kind of a wash. Both teams won about as many games. Both teams were constant contenders. So it ended up being a wash. And now, as I look back on it, as the cap grows and grows, and the cost of quarterbacks, for example, grows and grows, it's pretty obvious to me that their way was the better cap management way. Ours might have been the better use of the dollars because we were more sure of what we were getting. But with 100% injury rate in our game, which is what we have, I'm not sure Joe's way in the long run, if you had the money to do it, is not the better way. But if you did a scientific study and said, okay, what was the ROI in both cases, I think you'd find out that it was pretty darn close.
Yeah, and I just want to say for the listeners, when Mr. Polian says cash over cap, what he's referring to is there's a given cap that every team has, and it's the same for every team, subject to adjustments. But the cash budget, what he was referring to is his cash budget was at the cap. So if the cap was, I'm just going to throw out a number, $100 million, he couldn't spend more than $100 million in cash. But teams that could go cash over cap, and in that case, he was saying the Eagles didn't have the same budget. So that's because of the way the salary cap works and the way you can prorate bonuses. You can spend a lot more cash if you have the financial resources to do so, way above the cap. And I just wanted to clarify that for you, Bill.
That's why you're the cap guy. You said it better than I could.
But your explanation, people have to realize too, and this goes back to even the colleges, what are my available resources and how can I create a philosophy and scheme around the resources I know that are going to be available to me. Like we had Ned Colletti was on here, Dodgers general manager. And if you read his book, The Big Chair, he gives his timeline of all the different signings, but there's a lot of discussion about ownership money and divorce and different things that were impacting him from a financial standpoint of moves he couldn't make. So I think that's another thing that's a tribute to not only your evaluation, but to make the most of the money that you had to extend your players, which ended up being some really good players we just listed that weren't even the, some of the higher profile ones even. But then also, by taking that approach, did you ever have any problems with your relationship with players in terms of expecting you to do something earlier, or did they just kind of get used to the way you guys did business and you were able to maintain strong relationships?
No, they and the agents understood right up front, this is the way we do business. I was very clear about that. This is how we're going to do things. And because we don't redo you after your third year, doesn't mean that we don't want you here for the long haul. It's just the way we manage cash. That's the bottom line. And they understood that.
Speaking of agents, I know you negotiated with some of the most powerful agents in professional sports. I'm curious to hear who were some of the better or even most difficult negotiators you had to go against, and how you went about maintaining discipline in the negotiation process without letting it become adversarial.
Well, the adversarial part of it is really a good question. Prior to the salary cap and free agency, it was really quite adversarial because each team had their own budget, and it was very difficult to get them to commit to anything, especially for a top player, to get them to commit to anything that made any kind of sense, because the player really had no leverage. Their only leverage was holdouts, and there were a lot of them on the one hand. And if you're in an agent's position, you can't blame them for that. And it really was tough. And most of the things ended up adversarially because, you had a number that you couldn't go past, and the agent had a number that he absolutely had to have. So it was difficult. And holdouts are always difficult because now the owner, if not directly involved, is certainly asked about it. And it becomes an emotional issue. It becomes public. That all adds to the adversarial part of it. Once the salary cap came in, now I don't want to say that it was cooperative, but it was certainly not the terribly adversarial situation that we had pre-salary cap. And none of us, I'll speak for myself, I certainly didn't anticipate that. But what happened was, first of all, everybody knew what everybody else was getting, A, and B, everybody understood that, okay, there's X amount of room in this team's cap. And some players are going to have to be let go because they're cap casualties. We'll hear that in the next month because you've made a judgment, not that they weren't good players, but that you didn't have the room to keep them, especially if you're a good team. So the negotiations became a little more straightforward, a little more gentlemanly, a little less dramatic. Holdouts were essentially, for free agents, were essentially not allowed. If you signed a free agent contract back in the day, you couldn't hold out. There were very strong penalties against it. So that became much more of a business negotiation question, not how much, but how it's structured. How can you create room? The agents had to become more creative and less bellicose. Same with general managers. So it was a byproduct that I certainly didn't envision, but it made for certainly more efficient and I think less controversial kind of atmosphere. Now, what it did do is force clubs to say goodbye to players that you absolutely loved and wanted on your team, and they wanted to stay, but there's only so much room. There was a player that everybody in the building loved, who we simply couldn't keep, and he was offered not a king's ransom, but certainly a life-changing contract by another team in our division. And he called me the night before it was time to make a decision, and he said, "Just can't you find some way to keep me?" And I said, "No. And furthermore, I can't in good conscience have you turn that down. You got a family. You can't, you gotta go and take that money because we can't give it to you." He turned out to, be as good for the other club as he was for us, because he's a great person. His loss hurt us. We could not replace him. And it hurt us on the field the following year. And, but that's what the salary cap's designed to do. So the negotiation posturing became very, very different. As to agents, I think most are decent guys and gals. Some are far more knowledgeable than others. In the old adversarial days, agents would try to make a point about how tough they were and try to, break whatever system you used on an individual club. We had a holdout of a rookie, for example, a couple of games into the season for no good reason at all. The two agents, they were brothers, and they were in basketball principally, just wouldn't negotiate for whatever reason. I don't know why. They just wanted to make a name for themselves, to get their names in the paper, I guess. The only reason I could figure it out. In other situations, one agent in particular would just go to the newspaper and write a fiction story about what was going on with the negotiations, what was offered, what was said, just completely fictional. And that's not an easy thing to deal with, but there's less of that these days, which is a good thing.
All right, I'm going to ask two more questions. When you look back in your career, obviously other than winning Super Bowls, what accomplishment in professional football are you most proud of?
Honestly, my time on the competition committee. I spent 19 years on the competition committee, 20 if you count the year that I was working in the league office. And it was the most rewarding, educational, wonderful experience that I've ever had. I got to know, as a young GM, wet behind the ears, who had a hard time crossing the street proverbially. I got to spend 3 weeks every year with Paul Brown and Don Shula and people like that. And I got an incredible tutorial from them in terms of, here's how you run a team, here's the approach, the philosophical approach you should take, and help to formulate rules and regulations which made the game better. And then I had, through both the CBA process and later on as a member of the competition committee, chairman of the college relations subcommittee, I got to work with Paul Tagliabue up close and personal, and that's a PhD in management. The smartest person I've ever been around, most moral and straightforward person, incredibly good person, and just being around him is educational enough. But having to have the ability to sit down and talk with him about how things function and what his vision for the league was, an incredible experience. So I was blessed in the sense that I was lucky enough to be around the giant, the icons of the game and learn how they did things. And they were, I don't know if it's that way anymore, but they were tremendously giving and willing to answer any question I asked. So that to me that was the most important, or the most enjoyable part of my career. Let me put it that way.
Yeah, when I first came in the league, I had the privilege of going to league meetings and kind of sitting in the peanut gallery while you were up there in the panel. And I was so impressed that it was run like, I felt like when I was seeing you speak, like I was watching congressional leaders take the rules of the game, the integrity of the game, the safety of the game as important as any political leader or congressional leader would take in passing, how in depth you researched, analyzed the issues, took into consideration everything from owners' perspective to head coaches and general managers. And I don't think people appreciate how much time you actually spent doing those things in the competition committee. So I love that was your answer, because I got to witness some of it and still made a huge impression on me as a young lawyer coming into the league and watching how you played a big part in changing the game.
Yeah, well, thank you. I forgot to mention Jim Finks, who was the chairman of the committee during my time there. Tom Flores is a good friend and a former committee member and a fellow Gold Jacket. Either of us had gotten that accolade, made this point. He said, other than a Gold Jacket, the highest honor you can have in professional football is to be a member of the competition committee. And that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, it was great watching it, Bill. Really, I was a huge fan of that process. And the last question I'm going to ask is, this is something I ask of everybody. Would love your perspective on what do you think are the key traits of a great negotiator?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to be a good listener, because unless you know what it is your counterpart values and what the key parts of his presentation are, you're going to go down the wrong paths, invariably go down the wrong path. And that complicates things. So you have to be a great listener. And the questions you ask in the early stages of a negotiation should be aimed at that. Until you know his position or her position and what they think is important, you can't formulate your own position. And then you have to be adaptable, because 99 times out of 100, the number and the structure that you've decided internally with the owner is not what your counterparty wants. So you're going to have to figure out a way not only to bridge the gap, but to create a structure that works for you. Jim Irsay was the most knowledgeable owner I ever worked for, because he'd been a GM and he knew exactly what the process was. So he would say, let's take a hypothetical player. 18 million a year is as high as I want to go. And then he said, and you don't have 10% to play with, meaning that, you don't have 1.8 to fiddle around with. That was his way of saying, I know you got to stretch it, but make sure that this is the number in the neighborhood we finish in. I appreciated that greatly. Ultimately, and here's where the evaluation part comes in, you have to decide, and assuming we're talking a second contract here, you have to decide what that player's longevity is going to be. You have actuarial tables to work with on that, but you have to decide what that individual player's longevity is going to be, what his value is going to be over the course of his functional years. Because as you explained before, you can prorate dollars, bonus dollars, if you will, over the course of a contract. So for argument's sake, let's say we're going to give a $10 million bonus on a 5-year contract. We're talking about $2 million per year charged to the salary cap. Not today, by the way, it's chump change. But the question then is, you as a GM, in conjunction with both the head coach and the owner, have to say, I think we're going to get 3 functional years out of it. So here's the way we should structure this contract. And that's where you get into it with the agent in terms of how much money is paid up front, how much is guaranteed, structure, et cetera. Back in the day when I was doing it, typically, if you gave the owner the gross dollar amount that he was, the agent, the gross dollar amount that he was looking for, you could pretty much get the structure you wanted. I don't know if that's true anymore. I don't follow the negotiations that closely, but that was a pretty good trade-off. And in a lot of successful negotiations, that's how you end up. He gets to say the average annual value is $20 million, and cap-wise for you, for the first 4 years, it might be $22 million, and for the last 4 years, which he's not going to see, it might be $17 or $16 million. So, and that's all dead money, that goes on the cap. The thing about the cap is, as you know, it doesn't forgive and it doesn't forget. You're going to pay the piper sometime. The only question is when. So those are the complexities that go into it. But to your previous question about, is it adversarial? Yes, it is, but it's much more collegial now because you have to work together, agent, player, owner, GM, to figure out a way that it gets you the most bang for the buck under the salary cap. And a lot of that is very straightforward, where you would say, listen, I can't pay you, $7 million cap every year. We got to figure out a way to you want $28 million. We can't do 7 every year. We have to figure out a way to prorate this and make some of it recourse, etc. So non-guaranteed. That's what I mean by these negotiations being much more technical and to some degree collegial than they used to be.
Well, that's great. Bill, you've been so gracious with your time. I just want to thank you for coming on here, but I also want to thank you for everything you contributed to the game of football and that you continue to do so. I also know that you are a great mentor for a lot of general managers and the future next generation of general managers, because people tell me that all the time. And so you're doing a lot of things like that all the time for nothing in return. So thank you. And I've learned so much from you. I've learned so much from your book. I've learned so much from you today. So I appreciate you. Really, really big part of how the NFL has taken shape to what it is today. So thank you for that too.
Thank you very much, Cliff. It's been great to be with you and great to see you again.
Good to see you too. We'll stay in touch. Thank you, Bill.
Please do.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Negotiation Warriors. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe on the Negotiation Warriors YouTube channel and follow us at Front Office 360 on Instagram and X. And to find out how we're helping college athletic programs, go to frontoffice360.com.